All right, hello everyone. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn Friday, and today we have Cameron Cole with us. Cameron is the Director of Children, Youth, and Family at Cathedral Church of the Advent. He's also the chairman of Rooted Ministries, an organization that promotes gospel-centered youth ministry, and as well as being a writer and researcher who focuses on the spiritual well-being of kids as well as hope and suffering. So I've known Cameron for a long time and actually got to see him speak at my children's elementary school a couple of years ago. And that's where I really kind of knew actually, what his work and what he did. And it was really kind of influential session that my wife attended for, an hour, but it really changed a lot about the way we thought about our children and their time. So as we got into this quarantine world a week or so, and I really noticed all these changes in our family schedule that were actually uh, really positive in a way, that we were so much less busy and we had more time just around the house together. I wanted to talk to Cameron about it because I knew it was kind of one of his areas of research and focus. It was something he was really interested in. So that's why we had him come talk to us today about children's well-being and scheduling, and how we can maybe take some of the good parts of this time and take them forward with us once the world goes back to normal.
Yeah, thanks, Griffin. And you're right. I think that, for American society and for families, this can be an incredibly valuable time to kind of reconsider how we spend our time with our kids, and just kind of the value and the priority of having a sense of connection within the family. And so what I'm going to talk about today is overscheduling, and which is really kind of an epidemic among American families, and particularly middle class and upper middle class kids. And so, a couple of things I want to start out with as we start to think about how we spend time with kids and with our own children, and thinking about their schedules, and trying to be balanced and protect those schedules. There are two things I want to communicate. First thing, anytime we talk about things related to parenting, there's just a real risk for a parent to feel judged and feel inadequate and feel a sense of shame. And so the first thing I just want to communicate to you is, if you're a person who's watching this video and you care enough to learn about how to be a better parent, you're doing a good job. You're really trying hard. And so you need to give yourself a lot of grace in that, and recognize that you're not going to be a perfect parent. That ship sailed a long time ago, and that's okay. Your parents were not perfect, and you turned out okay. And so, I think we can have this fear as parents that we're just going to damage our kids, and certainly we want to do our best, and certainly we want to try to lead our kids in a wise and healthy way. But I first just want to kind of give you that sense of pause, that we know you're trying your hardest and you don't need to beat yourself up. If some of the things you learned during this session, you feel like maybe you made some bad choices or in some bad patterns, there's hope to go in another direction. And the second thing, and this is one of the real things I want you to hear in this talk, and that is that, when you first held your baby at the hospital, your child might be 10 or 12 or 16 or 18 now, however old, but when you go back to when that child was delivered and you held that baby, I want you to think about what your dreams and aspirations were for your life with that child. My guess is that you did not sit there and stare into the face of that beautiful child and say, "Oh, I can't wait to drive you around town and carpool from practice to practice." And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But most of your dreams and aspirations when you first had your baby were around connection, were about having a relationship with your child and enjoying your child and doing things together, and and eating lunches and dinners together, and going on walks together and things like that. All of your dreams had to do with relationship. And I think a lot of parents find themselves, as their children grow older, especially as they enter adolescence, feeling like that dream is kind of not an option, or that dream is kind of gone bye-bye. And one of the things I want to communicate to you today is I really want you to feel a sense of permission to pursue that dream of your first priority with your child being connection, having an intimate relationship with your child, because that is actually the thing that is in your child's best interest. One of the things you're going to hear me say today a lot is that families are for connection. And so I want you to feel like that desire, that kind of dream that you had for when you first had your baby, that for you to pursue that dream and to not let society, not let culture, not let the pace of life, don't let yourself be robbed of that. And so that's something to hang on to as we go through this time together. Is that what I'm going to communicate is that you pursuing that dream is what your child really needs. And so, first idea I want to talk about is how, as I said earlier, how families are for connection. And so, on your screen here, you're going to see a researcher and scholar named Brene Brown. Oh, if I can get it to share, there we go. Brene Brown, and she's a public figure. She's a sociologist a social worker and researcher by trade, but she's real famous for a couple of TED Talks, but one in particular called Vulnerability. And so Brene Brown did research for a number of years where she looked at what led to people having really fruitful, vibrant, healthy lives versus those who had really dysfunctional lives. And what Brene Brown found as the core indicator was the level of connection that a person had. The thing that distinguished people who had really healthy, successful, thriving lives from those who were dysfunctional is that those who had these healthy, fruitful lives had intimate relationships. They had a really healthy sense of connection in their lives. And so, that a lot of times we tend to think about in terms of like success and what's in our child's best interest. We tend to think that what it means to be a good parent and what your kid really needs is for you to to prepare them to be as successful for the market economy as possible, for them to have the best resume. And really, a lot of times, what we'll see is that the relational part of your child's life is kind of neglected. And what I want to communicate is that actually the relational part of your child's life is the most important part. And it's the thing to prioritize. And so with that being said, as we're starting to think in terms of those categories, I want to kind of show a framework that you can think about your parenting in. You can think about your child's well-being, your child's development. And so this framework is to think about leading your child in 4 different categories. One, they would be spiritual, emotional, relational, and then vocational or physical. And so the first, we can think in terms of relationship with God. So that would be like the spiritual part of your child's life. Second would be relationship with each other or with others. And so that's thinking about how you cultivate a child, how you lead a child who is able to have healthy relationships, and that obviously starts with having healthy relationships and intimate relationships within the family, with parents and siblings and extended family. Then we can think in terms of relationship with self. And that is really your child's emotional well-being, helping your child learn how to process their emotions. I think a really good practical thing to think about as you're parenting is to help your child have a robust emotional vocabulary, whereby they're able to express their emotions and talk about what they're feeling. And you find that in terms of overall mental health for a child, and also reduced incidence of addiction, that a child having a high emotional vocabulary and an advanced ability to process their emotions is one of the best indicators and steps forward in that area. And then finally, the 4th category is what I call relationship with the world. And so that I can think that you can think of that in 2 lanes. One is just like your child's physical well-being. Are they getting sleep? Are they eating right? Are they getting exercise and things like that? And then also too, you can think about that in terms of vocation. You're one thing you're obviously thinking about as a parent is, how do I lead my child towards autonomy and independence so that they can be, a self-supporting, law-abiding citizen when they get older. And so, that's a part of the equation as well. Well, the problem is the problem we face in American society when it comes to our kids is that there is a massive imbalance in terms of those categories. What we see is that of those 4 categories, the category related to relationship with the world, particularly things related to vocation, that it dominates American parenting. Parents, kind of they think in terms of, how do I help my child succeed in school? How do I help my child do well in sports? How do I help my child, do well on standardized tests? And basically, so much of the focus is on making sure your child has a very, very good resume so they can get into the best school possible, so that they can get the best job possible, so that they can be as successful as possible in their vocation and in the working world. And so what happens is there's an overall neglect of the other three categories. There's a neglect of your child's emotional development, spiritual development, and then relational development. And so the result of that is that we see that kids have horrible mental health. The mental health of American teenagers is very, very troubling, and we'll get into that in a second. But as evidence of this, this imbalance. This is a quote here from the Wall Street Journal, and it's actually from a book review that looks at the lives of the American elite. And so basically, they looked at kids who were really successful, and the book kind of looked at their quality of life, their mental health, and so on and so forth. And so in this quote, it says, it's again talking about these kids who had done well and gotten into good colleges. It says, beyond their glowing transcripts and the fact that they have become accomplished adult wranglers, these students are anxious, depressed, searching for some deeper meaning in their lives. One Stanford student told the author, for many students, rising to the absolute top means being consumed by the system. I've seen my peers sacrifice health, relationships, exploration, activities that can't be quantified and are essential to developing souls and hearts for grades and resume building. A Yale student put it more succinctly. I might be miserable, but were I not miserable, I wouldn't be at Yale. So you can see in that quote from the Stanford student that they basically said that there was an imbalance in the lives of their peers. So out of this imbalance, you see that there is a tremendous amount of overscheduling and really, really poor mental health that flows out of that. UCLA did a study in 2018 where they reported that 34.6% of graduating seniors and incoming college students felt overwhelmed by the number of commitments and schoolwork that they have. That number has risen by 20% over the last 5 years. Now, the National Institute of Health and the study they did on overscheduling, they declared that 10 hours of activity or more is too much for a teenager. And I would say that in my own experience as a youth pastor, that my students almost all have far more than 10 hours of extracurriculars and additional commitments after school. And so with that being said, I myself too have seen over the last 15 years how much the activity and the overscheduling of students has increased with each year. It is so much greater than it was, say, back in 2005, now here in 2020. I think one thing that is a little bit troubling for me is to see some of the patterns that a lot of these students live in. The typical day for a high school student is they wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and they go to school. Most of them don't have a lunch break. After school, they mostly have an activity, whether it's debate or a sport or dance, and then they will come home. They'll eat dinner. Some of them eat dinner in their room, and then they'll do schoolwork till 11, 12, 1 o'clock at night. And so one of the things that was really concerning to me is on a trip this past summer, we asked students to tell us about their typical day. And anytime they talked about taking a break or resting or having a snack or just watching some TV, like after they get home, they described that as procrastination. They felt ashamed by rest. They felt like they had no permission to just take a break. And so that just is an indicator of some of the poor life patterns that they've established. We have to think about how does that translate for our children if they maintain those life patterns through college into the working world, and then into marriage and family. What happens is you have a husband or a wife who goes to their job, comes home, eats, and then does work until they fall asleep. And so they're very absent from their spouse and from their kids. And so we need to think about how we're establishing life patterns for our kids. We're teaching them what a work-life balance looks like. And if families continue on this path, having these patterns of overscheduling, we really run the risk of establishing bad patterns for our kids, when they're adults and they have families. Anecdotally speaking, I find that it is much harder for me to get an appointment with a student, to have coffee, to get ice cream in the name of mentoring and checking on them as their pastor, than it is for me to get appointments with business leaders and business owners to ask them for money as a fundraiser for a nonprofit that I chair. A couple of years ago, in publishing a book, I had to get in touch with the number 3 person at Morgan Stanley in Manhattan. I was on the phone with him for 48. I was on the phone with him within 48 hours. It was much easier for me to get an appointment with a legend on Wall Street than it is for me to get an appointment with an average teenager in a suburban area, because they are so over scheduled. And so what we see as a result of this is that students have really, really poor mental health. You see that 25% of American high school students live with a level of anxiety that could be deemed, an anxiety disorder. The number of students who, the incidence of depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicidal thoughts is very high. In high school, among American high school students, 8% have attempted suicide, and 25% have considered suicide in a real way. That is very, very alarming and troubling. On top of that, Psychology Today, back in 2010, they reported that the average American teenager lives with a commensurate anxiety level as the average institutionalized psychiatric patient of the 1950s. And so, we have to ask the question of why is it that these kids, have, what is the connection between overscheduling and poor mental health? And so one of the top scholars on this, his name is Sunya Luther at Columbia University in New York. She has studied this, and she said, in reference to the high rates of depression, substance abuse, anxiety, and suicide among teenagers, she said that one of the 2 primary causes is a reduced amount of leisure time with family, leading to a sense of disconnectedness and a lack of intimacy. And the other factor was that these students live with chronic stress. They're working all the time. They are active all the time, and so as a result of that, they don't have hardly any time for exercise, for rest. They don't get nearly enough sleep, and so on and so forth. So it makes a lot of sense. And so what I want to look at now is just what are kind of the 3 factors that we see that drive this at the heart level. And so the 3 factors are, first off, let me start over with that. So what I want to look at now is what are the root causes of overscheduling? Like, what is it at the heart level that drives parents to feel like, to be a good parent, they have to afford their child every opportunity and do everything they can to build their child's college resume? The National Institute of Health, when it was looking at this issue, they found that unanimously and decisively that the driving figure for parents was that they felt like they needed to do everything they could to help their children have the best college resume possible. And so, the 3 factors that I want to focus on are, first, the paradigm for what constitutes good parenting. Second, a sense of competition. And then third, a sense of fear that parents experience. And so first, in talking about the standard parenting, a scholar, his name is David Elkin. He studied this for 3 decades, and he is at Tufts University. And so Elkin wrote a book called The Hurried Child. And what Elkin identified is that back in the 1980s, there was a shift in the paradigm for what constitutes being a good parent in the United States. In the past, it had been developing a child who had good morals and character. It had been providing nurture and stability and security for a child. That had kind of been, in a broad sense, the paradigm for good parenting. But there was a shift. The paradigm is described by Elkin as child competence. And what that means is that parents see their primary responsibility, what it means to be a good parent, is to make sure that that child is as successful as possible in the working world, and that a parent kind of functions like a coach in doing that for their child. And so David Elkin wrote in his book, The Hurry Child, many of the problems that I described in the previous to the second edition have only gotten worse. The concept of child competence, which drove much of the hurrying of childhood in previous decades, is very much alive today. Parents are under more pressure than ever to overschedule their children and to have them engage in organized sports and other activities that may be age inappropriate. And so, what you hear there from Elkin is that, the primary driver for parents is that they think that it's their primary job to prepare their child for the working world. And so they overschedule, not thinking about some of the mental health repercussions. And so the second kind of root cause is this sense of competition. There are only so many spots, at Vanderbilt. There are only so many spots in the incoming class at the University of Virginia, or at Alabama, or at Auburn, or at Stanford, or at Harvard, or wherever your child may go. So parents feel this sense that, gosh, there's almost an arms race. That's how the Wall Street Journal described this phenomenon, as an arms race amongst parents. And so to give you a sense of that, when I was a high school student, I was super, super ambitious and pretty over the top when it came to school. And so I was kind of one of the few kids who, for the SAT, bought an SAT prep book at Barnes & Noble. And over the summer, I would study vocabulary. I'd do practice tests. That was very unusual, that you would buy a book and that you would actually read it to prepare for the ACT or the SAT. Now, it has come to a point where almost every single child in my ministry attends an ACT prep class for about 8 weeks, either during the summer or during the school year. ACT prep classes didn't even exist back then. And now it's just a norm. And it's kind of this sense of, the competition. Well, goodness, that person is doing the ACT prep class. I guess I better do that for my child, or they're going to fall behind. Which takes us to the third factor, which is fear. A lot of parents are afraid that if they don't afford their child every opportunity, that they're failing their kids, that they're not being a good parent. So, if your child is really passionate about making the basketball team or making it onto the dance team, there's this sense, if I don't get my child a private coach, or if I don't get my child, into a 5-hour-a-day dance class, then I'm failing them as a parent. And so parents are afraid that they're not putting their best foot forward, and that they're not really being a good parent. And so, I really want to kind of absolve you of that fear, because it's a good thing for you to help your child grow and to learn how to work hard, and how to use their gifts and their talents. Like, those are all good things, and we really do need to back down from that sense of fear. We need to back down from that sense of competition, because what we find is that one of the primary ailments of kids this age is that they are very, very lonely. A researcher and child psychologist named Chap Clark, he, in a book called Hurt, he had this quote, and it was somewhat in response to what David Elkin said. He says, "I agreed with Elkin's findings of the hurried child. However, I prefer to use the label the abandoned child rather than the hurried child." He says, "The reasons are many and varied, but this concept of systematic abandonment of adolescents as a people group seems to capture the widest range of descriptors used by careful observers of adolescents and adolescents themselves." And so basically what Clark is saying, is that because kids are running and gunning all the time, and because their parents, the child competence is dominating their paradigm, Kids are just very disconnected and they're very, very lonely. And so, to land the plane here, what are some recommendations of what you can do? If you have younger kids, what is it that you can do to maybe start off with better patterns? And what is it? Or if you're kind of caught in this rat race, what are some ways that you can rethink about this? And so I have three just kind of heart level principles to think about, and then I'll give you some practical applications. The first is let connection be your standard for parenting. Let your child feeling like they have a sense of intimacy and fellowship within your family. Let that be your standard of parenting. Your child in their school system and with their coaches, like they're gonna get the tools they need to be successful. You don't have to be their coach. Your child needs connection, not coaching from you. And certainly, there's a role for that in your role as a parent. There's a place for that, but that does not need to. Don't let your child's confidence dominate your paradigm. Let connection be the primary thing that you think about. The second thing is I want you to feel permission to enjoy your child. There's a writer named Rob Bell, and Rob Bell says the best thing you can do for your child is to enjoy your child. To enjoy your child, to do fun things with your child, to go on vacations together, to go get ice cream together, to go on hikes together. Like enjoying your child is one of the best things you can do for your child's overall well-being. You're giving them a sense of connection and you're giving them a sense of value and self-worth because they're seeing that they are something to be delighted in. And that is huge for your child's overall mental health and psyche and sense of self-worth. And then a third kind of principle that I would say is what you desire in your family is actually what's best for your child. Your teenager is going to act like they don't want to be around you. They're going to give you the stiff arm. They're going to give you all kinds of verbal and nonverbal communication that is saying that they don't want to hang out with you, that they don't want you involved in their life. I'm going to tell you that is not true. I know as a youth pastor and someone who has spent time with hundreds and hundreds of teenagers, that what they communicate to you is totally the opposite of what they communicate to us behind closed doors. They like being connected to their parents. They like having a sense of relational security within their family. And so even though you're going to get pushback from your kid, I promise you, they want to hang out with you. So I want to finish with a couple of practical tips that hopefully can give you some concrete direction on where to go with this. So first thing is set up sacred boundaries. Here's what I mean by that. There are certain, you as a parent or you with your spouse, you should establish things that are sacred cows in your family. Now that could be that for your family, you're going to have a family and their sacred boundary is we're going to eat something together every day. That doesn't mean that they're going to eat every meal together or they're going to have dinner together because their children are all competitive athletes. They're extremely good athletes. So that might be that they eat dessert together, but at least 20 minutes a day, they will eat something together and no one can have their phone at the table. They have extremely well-adjusted children. I have another family and the parents would say, the girls, they had two girls when they were teenagers, hey girls, pick the night that you want to hang out with your friends. It could be Friday night or Saturday night, and the other night we're going to hang out as a family. And the girls would give them a hard time, but at the end of the day, they would have one weekend night where they did something together. They watched a movie, they go out to dinner, they hang out, whatever. And the kids again, they would fight every week, but then at the end of that night, they were happy. I have one other family. And this is not really something that most families can do. But I had one family and their deal was the mother was from the Northeast and they would go for a full month every summer to go see their family. And the husband would stay and work and he would fly up on weekends. Again, not terribly practical for everybody, but they basically said, hey kids, you cannot participate in a sport that would prevent you from being able to travel for that month as a family. Again, incredibly well-adjusted children, but that's an example of a sacred boundary. And so think about what your sacred boundaries for connection are, whether it's having a meal together, whether it's, spending another weekend together, whatever it is, but set those in stone, communicate them, and protect them. Don't let those be robbed or compromised. Second, teach work-life balance. Keep in mind that your child, is getting patterns for their whole life in your household. And so, it's a good thing to give your child permission to say, hey, look, you need to sleep, like 10:30 or whatever the time is, you got to put work down, you got to put school down, and you got to go to bed. Hey, you need to have some downtime every day. You need to spend 30 minutes or an hour or whatever shooting baskets outside, watching TV, whatever it is. But help your child develop some life patterns, give them some permission with rest and exercise and sleep and recreation to where they have some tools for that when they get older. They're not naturally going to develop good life patterns. That's something you want to teach them as a child so that translates to them being an adult. Third, let your default be no. Think about this. Here's what I mean by that. I think parents too flippantly will commit to certain things like, oh, we're going to do the all-star baseball team or the travel baseball team, or we're going to sign up for this ACT prep class, whatever it may be. And they don't necessarily think about how that's going to impact the whole family as a system. And so what I would say is be really, really thoughtful, be really hesitant. Let your default be no, or let me think about this before you commit to anything. And then really weigh the cost of what it's going to be like for your family, for your child to participate in that activity. And so one thing I would also say in that is think at the margin. Like, I think a lot of parents feel like their child has to take every advanced class. And, what would it be like to just take 4 advanced classes instead of 5? What would it be like to not do that advanced science? So your child can have a lunch period where they can hang out with friends or they can do homework so they don't have so much at night. So think at the margin. Think about that extra commitment that you're making, how much more it adds to your child's workload and how much it disrupts your family's ability to connect. 4, examine your own idols. What I mean by that is, examine what your values are and how much of that you might be imposing upon your child in an unhealthy way. A lot of times, parents, we want to live out our inadequacies through our own children. And that's not fair to our kids, and it's not healthy for them either. And so think about where it is that your dream to be a star athlete or your dream to go to an Ivy League school, how much of that you're projecting on your child. Because a lot of times parents, we can do that. And I know I've been guilty of that myself. And then the last thing I would say is don't operate out of fear and shame. Don't let being afraid that you're going to fail your child. Don't let feeling this sense of shame that you're not doing as much as other parents to promote your child. Don't let that drive your behavior. I started here and I want to end here. What your child needs from you is not coaching. Your child needs connection. And so it's great. I'm in some ways encouraging you to be selfish because I know that's what you really want as a parent. You don't necessarily want to be driving carpool or doing all these things that we're not really connecting with your child. You're just kind of being their chauffeur. And so I encourage you to remember, go back to when you had your baby and what your dreams and aspirations were there, and don't let the pace of life rob you of that. Don't let your dreams and aspirations for connecting with your child be taken away. You have a very limited amount of time with your child. And the thing I want to encourage you to do is to really enjoy it and to provide a sense of connection within your family. That's all I have to say, Griffin.
All right. Thank you, Cameron. That was great. I'm going to save it and just listen to it once a week because with a 6th grader and a 3rd grader, I'm like right in the middle of this sort of, I feel like, but it's really a very freeing message as a parent to know that, that is not that particular activity is not that important. We can skip that one. We can move on and do our family thing and everything's going to be okay if we're not in advanced math or whatever. So, I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of people will. Even we have a lot of young babies at HC3 right now, and so I think hopefully everybody who's got the 1-year-olds and 2-year-olds will hear this and kind of set some thoughts in their head about as their child grows and how to think about this thing. So, and we have parents, grandparents. So I think hopefully everybody gets a lot out of it as much as I did. So thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.